So here you see a map. This map is depicting for you the territories that were lost by Germany after World War One as a consequence of the Treaty of Versailles. You see here the large area known as the Rhineland, that area that flanks the Rhine River, the general geographic border between the Low Countries here in France and Germany. The Rhineland is made a demilitarized zone. It's an area where the German military cannot enter. Now here you have Alsace and Lorraine. Alsace and Lorraine, those provinces that had been fought over for generations. They had gone to Germany after the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. After the Treaty of Versailles, they were briefly independent after World War I, but they're ultimately returned back to France. The Saar, this area right here, there's very resource-rich region, coal fields and so forth, was given to France to help France pay for the reparations that it demanded from Germany as a result of its guilt for the First World War. Regions like Silesia, which you see here, Germany and Austria had fought a war over Silesia in the 1860s. They lose Silesia. These areas of Poland and West Prussia are lost to Poland, including they lose the city of Danzig, which today is the city of Gdansk in Poland. This area right up here. Now, Germany's government was called the Weimar Republic, and it was centered right here. This is Weimar. And the reason it wasn't in Berlin, for example, is because cities like Berlin, after World War I, there was a massive amount of violence, revolutionary violence, uprisings, anti-government violence in Germany. Communist revolutions, for example, in places like Berlin. And Weimar was effectively one of the most stable cities. It was one of the cities that wasn't facing revolutionary violence. And so this is where the government met. And as a result, this government that met in Weimar became known as the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic signed the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles certainly wasn't a great treaty for Germany. They lose all these territories. They lose even these territories up here to Denmark, which they had fought a war with Denmark in the 1860s over these territories as well, Schleswig and Holstein. Germany lost all of its colonies. It had massive reparation payments to the tune of today almost $500 billion. And in the process, it also had lost a lot of resource-rich areas. But the Weimar Republic didn't really have a choice in whether or not it would sign this treaty. The treaty was actually formed without the negotiations of the Weimar Republic's delegation. The Kaiser had fled the country. The Treaty of Versailles was put together by the French, the British, and the Italians, with Woodrow Wilson also there kind of grudgingly going along to some extent. And it was presented to the new government in Weimar, Germany, and they were basically told, you will sign this agreement, or if you don't, you will face occupation of your country. Effectively, that was the sort of spirit of this arrangement. So the Weimar Republic signs the Treaty of Versailles. After the Weimar Republic signs the Treaty of Versailles, you see a process whereby from the very beginning, democracy in Germany is really discredited. And the Weimar Republic was a democracy. It was a representative constitutional government. It was a government that was associated with championing progressive reforms in education. It was a government associated with embracing the sort of more liberal social norms of the 1920s. It expanded greatly civil liberties. It was a democratic republic. It was a democratic government. Really, Germany's first experiment with true democratic government, from the executive down into the parliament, the Reichstag. But of course, Versailles becomes an incredibly controversial treaty, seen as being very damaging to Germany. And as a result of that, the Weimar Republic, because the Weimar Republic was the government responsible for signing the treaty, the Weimar Republic was often blamed for the signing of this treaty. And when you look at the rise of the Nazis really continually blamed the Weimar government, the Weimar Republic, for signing the Treaty of Versailles, and they effectively asserted that the Weimar Republic was almost like a treasonous government that was involved in this international agreement designed to destroy Germany. And that's the first theme here. And when we look at the rise of Nazi Germany, the number one part of Nazism is really, or one of the number one, maybe you wouldn't say the number one, but one of the central, most grounding purposes of Nazi propaganda as the Nazis rose to power in the 20s and early 30s was to discredit democracy. The Nazis want to destroy democracy. They believe that liberal democracy is weakening Germany. They believe liberal democracy is destroying Germany, and they want to discredit it and eliminate democracy and replace it with an authoritarian system of government in the establishment of a German empire that would, of course, be based on race and ethnicity, a racial German empire. It would be built on the destruction and massacre of millions of people. The Nazis and other radical groups would have referred to the Treaty of Versailles as the Diktat. It was the dictated peace, and it was very unpopular. This is an anti-treaty poster, a German anti-treaty poster, and here it shows what they will lose. 20% of their production territories, 10% of their populations, a third of coal production, a fourth of their agricultural yields, 4/5 of their ore resources, like iron ore, and all their colonies and their merchant marines. They had a huge limitations on their military as well. So it is a very harsh treaty. Germany was forced to sign Article 231, the so-called War Guilt Clause, and to effectively agree to, full guilt of the conflict. It was forced to sign reparations, meaning money they owed, which in the 21st century, we're talking, upwards of $500 billion in the 21st century. Forced disarmament, a very small, non-threatening army, and significant territorial losses, as I've already pointed out. And so this was not a popular treaty, and it is very much sort of, grabbed hold of by more radical groups in Germany at the time. And World War I was admittedly a very, very heavy burden for German society. The population was down from 1913, 67 million. The death toll from the war were incredibly difficult to deal with. There was, of the 11 million people mobilized, almost 2 million were killed, and over 4 million of them were wounded, perhaps many of them in the way that this soldier's wounded. Amputations, post-traumatic stress disorder were very, very, very problematic in society during the 1920s. The casualties were nearly 6 million from the war total, over 50% of those mobilized. And Versailles was very much, kind of adding sort of fuel to this burden, to this pain in German society. And so this is a very, very difficult time in Germany. And as a result of this, it does open the door for the potential popularity of radical groups.